time, at noon, we continued agenda item 8, and we will be hearing, we'll be hearing that in just a moment. Following agenda item 8, we're going to move to agenda item 10, which is the local agency efforts and the issue on coliform in water also. Then we will move to back to giving a couple of awards. Then we'll do enforcement policy, and then we'll have the election of the chair, agenda item 11, and vice chair.
Carl, do we have to report out of closed session?
Good question. So the board held a closed session in which they discussed the Walker Mine, and following that went into personnel session.
That is sufficient.
Thank you. With that said, we're back on agenda item 8, and we're looking for input from the prosecution team as to considering some of the concerns that the board members had.
So we did that. Would you first like to hear from Mr. Elder about the economic benefit, and then I can talk about proposed
Certainly.
changes?
Certainly.
Brian Elder, Office of Enforcement, State Water Board. I've taken the oath. So we re-evaluated the economic benefit per your guidance. Sorry, Andrew, is it in here? Oh, is that what you're saying? Sorry. Is there a way to put it on here? Or I guess I can. Okay. So I'll speak in general to the outcome. So again, based on guidance, we looked at whether if the discharger had enrolled at the appropriate time under the general order or through the coalition. And so the compliance actions that we would be looking at, again, would be the delayed cost of the annual coalition dues, which the discharger provided in his rebuttal as a $120 per year. He was asked to pay those back dues, so those would be, again, considered delayed. There we go. And the avoided costs, based on discussions with program staff, of 3 farm evaluation reports at an approximate cost of 2 hours per report, and a nitrogen management plan, which in this case, because of the discharger's practices, would be minimal. So total compliance costs were approximately $1,300 from the periods of 2014 to 2017, with a total economic benefit based on those costs of $503. Using the 10% adjustment, we'd be looking at a minimum penalty if we were to go this approach of $550. However, I'll continue with my assertion that I believe that the original way in which we presented economic benefit is the appropriate methodology here. And with that, I'm open to answering questions.
And what does that do for the final number again?
So minimum penalty, the total economic benefit was $503 plus 10%. You're looking at approximately $550.
Rather than the 30,000?
Well, this would be for the minimum penalty. So
Okay.
I think we had 13.
That doesn't change the proposed yet. We haven't got there.
That'll be someone else presenting that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, because I was thinking, oh my God.
So this is $503 versus the
Yeah.
originally proposed $13,957.
Okay,
And just for clarification, we assess what the economic benefit would be under the direction you provided. So we were just providing those calculations for your
Good.
consideration.
Good.
Our proposal is the economic benefit would be assessed the way it currently is assessed in the draft order, but we are providing the numbers for you for your consideration.
That's correct. Any questions?
No.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, we did go back through and did some adjustments to the factors, and I'll just, I'll describe them first, and then I can pull up some of the changes we would propose to the factors in the language. But the first adjustment would be to change the per day factor from 0.65 to 0.45. And that would be based on Mr. Laranaga's testimony that he did not use pesticides or fertilizers, and so the threats to the threats from those discharges would be minimal. But there still is the harm to the program, which is a substantial harm to the program. So the harm to the environment may be small, or potential harm, but the harm to the program still is rather large. And so we would still stick with that moderate deviation, but reduce it to 0.45 in that range, which can be between 0.4 and 0.7. And then the other change we proposed is in the cleanup and cooperation, to reduce that from 1.4 to 1.3. And then if we do that, we end up with a final proposed penalty of $19,773, making those adjustments. And then we would propose then a few corresponding changes in the language on the attachment A to explain those. And I can go through those if the board would like.
Please do.
Okay. So the first change would be under potential for harm. We would just add a sentence that says, the discharger testified, however, that no pesticides or fertilizers are applied to the parcel in question. This finding decreases the potential for harm. And so then that gets us to the 0.45. And then again, so we change that from 0.65 to 0.45. And it says, we added here but these potential discharges would not contain pesticides or fertilizers. And then we changed the calculation based on that. So the initial liability is $11,700. And then, as I mentioned, we changed the cleanup and cooperation from 1.4 to 1.3. And we added a sentence saying the discharger obtained regulatory coverage under the general order on 27 November 2017 when the board received the complete NOI and $200 processing fee. So it acknowledges the discharger meeting his regulatory obligations at that point. And then all other factors would be the same. When you do the revised calculation, you end up, as I said, with $19,773.
Questions?
I don't necessarily have a question, but I'll say that the 1.3 seems more in line of the way I felt, because 1.4 didn't leave a lot of room for meeting the uppermost barrier of that factor. And so if we did come across an issue where we had somebody who's very recalcitrant that also, had great harm to the environment, it felt like there wasn't enough room to adjust it. So 1.3 is more in line with the feeling that I had. So I would be inclined to support this.
Very good. Any further questions or comments of the
Just,
prosecution team? Go ahead, John.
The question about shrinking the number of days, that
Yeah.
didn't change, nothing?
That didn't change because we had already gone to the minimum that we could. Yeah.
Great.
Any further comments or questions? Thank you very much. Seeing none, then I'll close the hearing. Discussion will be limited to board members and members of the advisory team. So, yes.
Dr. Longley, should we have Mr. Laranaga respond to the new proposal from the prosecution team?
That's up to the board. I personally don't see any need, but we've heard him already today. I see no need for that. Entertain a motion?
So I would say that I am inclined to support the penalty as, with the adjustments that we just heard, because I think it takes into account certainly the feeling, the statement expressed by Vice Chair Cadera, which does call personal responsibility and into the forefront, which does need to be there. I don't think that the discharger was trying to slink away. I think it was a reason, but I don't think it was a good reason. I don't think that's a reasonable thing to do. So understanding that personal responsibility is important, balancing that against the facts in his particular circumstance that has to do with the smaller type of risk given his farming practice and the modified cleanup and cooperation, I would support the dollar amount in the, I would support the fine in the dollar amount presented by Assistant Executive Altivote.
Is that a motion?
So that's my motion.
With late revisions and late revisions?
If I could clarify, it's up to the board's discretion as to whether you want to include the revised calculation of economic benefit or the original calculation of economic benefit, bearing in mind that the prosecution team is sticking with the initial assessment. It wouldn't change, since the assessed penalty is above the economic benefit as initially calculated, it doesn't present a problem if the board thinks that's the right policy direction to go in.
So I would not tend to, so my motion would not accept the revised calculation based on economic benefit. To me, that's a policy consideration that I, as an individual board member, would support being taken into account in the future. But as to this motion, I'm making it based on the calculation of economic benefit as presented in the ACL that was part of the packet with the revisions.
Thank you.
And that includes both late revisions and late revisions. Is that my understanding? Correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Can I get a question? Sorry.
Go ahead.
A question about the penalty. When it comes to payment, is there any payment options available for this, if there need be?
Counsel, could you answer that?
So I think the answer is under the statutory provisions, the payment is due within 30 days of our assessment. We have in the past entered into arrangements for payment plans, but that type of arrangement happens outside of the administrative civil liability order itself. And we're generally open to that. There's no reason to. And usually it has an acceleration clause, so if somebody misses a payment, it's all due.
Do I have a second?
I'll second. And
Harm?
I just want to say, I mean, the policy implications of which one of these to use, I mean, staff can always look at those. I actually appreciated having them, in this case, both of them completed. But in a general policy, if people aren't enrolled, I think it's incumbent on the board to assume that they chose not to do the coalition, therefore they need to have been doing the individual, and if they haven't, that's what we should assess, our minimum penalty upon. Just if we're talking some general policy, and we can have a more discussion later at another time on that if we choose to, but that would be my general intent. And so I'm seconding the motion.
So I have a second. I have a motion from Carmen with late revisions and late revisions. Bob seconded. Is there any further discussion?
Yeah, this is
Yes,
John.
John.
This is John. I'll leave the discussion about minimum penalty policy for another date. The one factor that resonated with me was the question about whether or not the local sub-watershed group had been contacted and had committed to talking to the discharger. And I'm satisfied that that happened, and there was lengthy opportunity to resolve this. So between those two, though I feel this is slightly higher than I would have went, I will be supporting the motion.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, call the roll.
Ms. Ramirez?
Yes.
Mr. Schneider? Mr. Costantino?
Aye.
Ms. Brar?
Yes.
Ms. Cordaro?
Yes.
Dr. Longley?
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you very much. At this point, we'll move to agenda item 10. This time, the board will hear an update on the efforts of local agencies and regional board staff to address trash and debris concerns related to homeless encampments. This is an information item only, and no action will be taken, although the board may ask questions and provide direction to staff. After the staff presentation, we'll have presentations by representatives from Sacramento County, Sacramento Regional Sanitation District, Sacramento Steps Forward, and Dr. Roland Brady. Following the presentations, interested persons will be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. We'll now hear the staff presentation.
Good afternoon, Dr. Longley and members of the board. My name is Nicole Morgan, and I'm a supervising engineer here in the Sacramento office. This afternoon's information item will provide an overview of the local agency efforts to address illicit dumping of trash and debris in the American River Parkway, and we'll discuss the water quality concerns along the parkway. In August of 2017, a draft summary of E. coli data collected in 2015 and 2016 was released to the media and became a big issue. The draft summarized results from 3 watersheds with a history of elevated E. coli, including the Lower American River. To be consistent with the California Water Quality Monitoring Council's My Water Quality Portal, these studies were called Safe to Swim. However, after discussions with the county environmental health director, it was recognized that this title was misleading. In order to determine if a water body is safe to swim, daily samples would need to be collected, but historically we only monitored monthly or twice per month. It was also recognized that more monitoring is needed to characterize the problem and identify sources. Therefore, we have retitled the study's recreational beneficial use assessments to be more accurate. Alicia Wenzel with our Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program, also known as SWAMP, will provide more information regarding the previous monitoring and our ongoing proposed monitoring in a few minutes. Then, in September 2017, staff received complaints regarding the potential discharge of trash and human waste to surface water from homeless encampments along the American River Parkway. This picture illustrates the debris that is left in the floodplain after a camp has been relocated. During high flows, if the site is not clear, the debris can be washed into the local waterway, presenting water quality concerns. Per the 2017 Homelessness in Sacramento County point-in-time count, there has been approximately 30% increase in nightly homeless. However, this is not just a local issue, it's a statewide and national issue. There's an estimated 1/5 of the nation's homeless population that live in California, and mostly in large urban areas. And currently, the San Francisco Bay and San Diego regions are working to identify solutions in their regions. The US EPA noted that this should be addressed on a statewide issue. This is a complex societal problem that will not be quickly resolved. Any resolution will take local, state, and federal agencies working collaboratively with other stakeholders, including environmental groups, community groups, and homeless advocacy groups, to identify short and long-term solutions. While this is somewhat a separate issue than E. coli sampling, the two issues overlap, as we do not currently know the percentage of the E. coli that is found in the area waterways is from human or animal sources. This diagram illustrates the overlap between the potential sources of E. coli and trash. E. coli can come from several sources, including wildlife and domestic animals, sanitary sewer overflows, also known as SSOs. In addition, stormwater systems, recreational activities, and from illegal camping can also contribute to E. coli and trash in the area. Trash can also come from illegal dumping. However, we currently do not know what percentage of each of these sources are potentially contributing to water quality concerns in the American River Parkway. And this is something that we want to start finding out through future monitoring. In today's presentation, staff will discuss our efforts to date to address the two overlapping water quality issues and provide a summary of our proposed actions. Alicia Wenzel from our SWAMP program will first review the monitoring data collected to date and plans for future monitoring. Rich Bull with our stormwater program will provide an overview of the beneficial uses of the parkway and a summary of the stakeholders that we're reaching out to in order to form a collaborative process. I will then summarize our current and ongoing stakeholder efforts. Following staff's presentation, Jeff Leatherman with the Sacramento County Parks Department will provide an overview of their efforts. We'll then have a short presentation from Christoph Dobson with the Sacramento Area Sewer District discussing their funding program and how it is assisting to address the issue. Ryan Boothborough, the Chief Executive Officer for Sacramento Steps Forward, will provide his perspective of how to address the issue. Then Dr. Brady will, with the Sacramento Creeks Council, will share his concerns. I'll now turn the presentation over to Alicia with our SWAMP program.
Good afternoon, Dr. Longley and members of the board. My name is Alicia Wenzel, and I'm an engineer and geologist here in the Sacramento office. As Nicole mentioned, I will be giving a quick overview of SWAMP's E. coli monitoring in the Lower American River watershed, and then providing an update on our current and planned efforts. Since 2007, SWAMP has conducted a series of studies to assess the protection of recreational beneficial uses in water bodies throughout the Central Valley region. As part of those studies, the Lower American River was sampled from 2008 to 2016. During that time, over 600 samples were collected from the 13 sites you see mapped here. Most of these sites are regional parks or other public access points. Samples were collected during the summer swimming season and were analyzed for the bacteria E. coli. Most strains of E. coli are harmless, but it is widely used in water quality monitoring as an indicator of fecal pollution and the possible presence of pathogens. Elevated E. coli levels have been found in numerous water bodies in the Central Valley region that are influenced by a variety of land uses. Since E. coli is found in human, pet, livestock, and wildlife waste, identifying a particular source requires additional study. One of the ways the SWAMP data has been used is to update the Clean Water Act's Section 303D list of impaired water bodies. A water body is listed as impaired when monitoring data exceeds water quality standards. In the combined 2014 and 2016 update to the 303D list, the Lower American River was listed as impaired due to indicator bacteria based on an assessment of SWAMP data. In response to that decision and in an effort to better understand the elevated E. coli levels in the Lower American River, Swamp collected weekly bacteria samples for a one-year period in 2015 and 2016. Based on a review of the existing data, we focused the monitoring on 6 sites between the Howe Avenue crossing and the confluence with the Sacramento River. By collecting weekly samples, we were able to calculate 6-week rolling means and compare those to US EPA's 2012 recreational water quality criteria. The dark orange color in the graphs you see at the bottom of this slide show the number of calculations that were above the US EPA criteria at each of our sites, and you'll notice an increasing trend toward or downstream towards the confluence. One result of the recent public attention on conditions in the Lower American River is recognition that we need a better process to notify the public of elevated E. coli levels. During the first few years of monitoring, Water Board staff reached out to the Sacramento County Public Health Office to inform them of the results and provide them with website links with additional information. In 2016, Sacramento County was also informed of the proposed 303D listing for the Lower American River for indicator bacteria. Unfortunately, recent events have highlighted the need for additional communication and coordination between the Water Board, local health departments, and land managers. To ensure better coordination in the future, Water Board staff are working with environmental health directors in Sacramento, Solano, and Yolo counties to develop a protocol to ensure data are available to all agencies and the public is adequately notified when recreational waters may pose a risk to public health due to the elevated E. coli levels. We recognize that this problem is not unique to this area, and we need something that can be used in all 39 counties within the Central Valley region. Later this spring, there are plans to present the protocols to the California Conference of Directors of Environmental Health and work towards a region or even statewide protocol and guidance. Another result of recent events is a proposed monitoring study to begin this summer. Water Board staff are currently working with Sacramento County, Sacramento Area Sewer District, and local cities to develop and fund a study to investigate the elevated bacteria levels in the Lower American River. While details are still being worked out, the study will be designed to meet several objectives. One objective will be to collect information on current E. coli levels, as well as data to improve our understanding of the spatial and seasonal trend in those levels. Another important objective of the study will be to identify the sources of fecal contamination in the Lower American River. We're fortunate that in recent years there's been a lot of advancement in the field of microbial source tracking, including guidance documents and standardized methods. These methods analyze DNA in water samples to determine if a specific animal or human host is contributing fecal pollution to a water body. As Nicole described earlier, there are a number of potential sources of E. coli that have been identified. These include wildlife, people's pets, sanitary sewer overflows, stormwater systems, recreational activities, and illegal camping. Based on this, we propose to focus source tracking analysis on birds, dogs, and humans. And a third objective is to look more closely at the risk to public health. Identifying the sources of fecal pollution will enable us to monitor for the specific pathogens associated with each source. Targeted pathogen monitoring, as well as weekly sampling at popular swimming areas during the study period, will improve our understanding of the public health risk. While that study plan is being developed, and in response to the recent public concern, SWAMP staff began monitoring E. coli levels in early January. Currently, the monitoring includes 7 of our existing sites on the Lower American River and 2 new sites on Steelhead Creek. So Steelhead Creek flows through the American River Parkway and Discovery Park, which you'll be learning more about from Rich's presentation. Shown here are the results from our first 4 weeks of monitoring. The values highlighted in orange are above the US EPA statistical threshold value of 320, and the values in yellow are above US EPA's recommended beach action value of 190. These are preliminary results, and we do plan to continue this weekly monitoring to track E. coli levels and patterns. However, looking more closely at the values that are highlighted, so during their first sampling event on January 11th was shortly after a storm event, which likely resulted in some of these higher values. We've also noticed a large number of gulls and geese at our beach site at the confluence of the American and Sacramento rivers, which may be contributing to the high values there at the top of the table. This data is currently being shared with the County Environmental Health Director on a weekly basis as the results are available. Sacramento County will be reviewing the data to assess the public health risk and determine when public notification is appropriate. Also taking into consideration that January is not a high-use recreation period. So at this point, I was just going to pause and see if there are any questions on our planned or current monitoring before I turn the presentation over.
I see none. Go ahead.
All right, then I'll turn the presentation over to Rich.
While he's getting ready, I do have a question for you. You can answer from there. So you're looking at Pacific pathogens. What might those be?
So the ones we're currently considering, Cryptosporidium and Giardia, protozoa, pathogenic E. coli, like O15H7, Salmonella, also looking into the possibility of analysis for viruses, including hepatitis A.
Thank you. The hepatitis was where I was specifically going on that, because I know that in the San Diego region, they've done a considerable amount of hepatitis work and interested in the outcomes of that.
Yeah, so I've been tracking that and looking for labs that are able to provide that analysis.
Right. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, Dr. Longley and members of the board. My name is Rich Mull, and I'm a senior environmental scientist here in the Sacramento office. The Parkway includes the Lower American River, which includes approximately 29 miles of meandering equestrian hiking trails and one of the country's best Class 1 bike paths. It extends from Folsom Dam to the confluence of the Sacramento River. The entire parkway is approximately 4,800 acres. The 23-mile portion of the parkway from Folsom Dam to the confluence of the Sacramento River has been designated a wild and scenic river by both state and federal agencies. Aquatic recreation in the river includes fishing, swimming, wading, snorkeling, boating, canoeing, kayaking, and rafting. Several commercial rafting companies provide raft rentals on the river, and during the summer months, the river is used by thousands of people to cool off and escape the summer heat. The County of Sacramento has primary responsibility for the day-to-day management of the Lower Parkway. The Lower Parkway extends from Hazel Avenue Bridge to the confluence of the Sacramento River, exclusive of the Nimbus Fish Hatchery. The Sacramento County Park Rangers Unit is responsible for the day-to-day patrols and enforcement. However, the Rancho Cordova Police Department, the City of Sacramento Police Department, Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, Fish and Wildlife Wardens, as well as other local law enforcement agencies assist with public safety issues. The main area of concern is Steelhead Creek between the West El Camino Avenue crossing and the Arden Garden connector. Steelhead Creek, formerly the Natomas East Main Drainage Canal, is extensively used by the homeless. A portion of Steelhead Creek, which is located within the parkway, is commonly called Bannon Slough. The main area of concern includes Discovery Park. Discovery Park is a 302-acre park and is located beside I-5 in downtown Sacramento. Discovery Park is part of the Sacramento Area Flood Control System. It is designed to flood and take the pressure off the American River levees when there's a lot of water in the river system. During the winter months, heavy winter rains can force homeless campers out of the lower reaches near the park and can result in human waste, trash, and debris entering the river. Here are a few photographs of some of the trash and debris in and around the homeless camps in Discovery Park. This type of trash can include human waste, spoiled food, animal carcasses, broken glass, toxic chemicals, hypodermic needles, weapons, and personal items. The photograph illustrates how the trash and debris can be distributed, making the cleanup more difficult and time-consuming. Multiple federal, state, and local stakeholders are involved in the American River Parkway. Federal agencies include the U.S. EPA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA Marine Fisheries, the Army Corps of Engineers. State agencies include the state and regional water boards, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and Caltrans. Local agencies include the county health directors, the County of Sacramento Regional Parks Department, Sacramento Regional Sanitation District, multiple community groups, and homeless advocacy groups. As Nicole briefly discussed earlier, since this is a larger societal problem and MS4s are a source of E. coli and trash, they will also be part of the solution. MS4s are publicly owned conveyance systems, including streets, ditches, curbs, gutters, and storm drains that are designed to collect or convey stormwater. The MS4s are responsible for controlling the discharge of pollutants, including trash, from their systems to surface waters. The MS4s are permitted facilities and have to comply with their permits and the state board's trash policy. The Parkway is located in the floodplain and is not within the jurisdiction of the MS4, though. So this makes the issue more challenging and further supports the need for a collaborative approach. Nicole will now discuss our efforts to date and some of the outreach efforts we have planned in the future.
So, as discussed earlier, to date, Water Board staff have met with local county health directors to review the water quality monitoring done to date and to discuss how to coordinate in the future. Staff also met with executive management from County of Sacramento Parks Department, and Regional SAN to discuss their current efforts relating to the complaints received. In addition to reaching out to local agencies responsible to maintaining the parkway, staff have also connected the concerned citizens with those agencies to help facilitate the ongoing cleanup. We have also obtained an outside facilitator to help organize our efforts and to identify key stakeholders. In addition, staff contacted other regions and US EPA to learn from other ongoing efforts in the state. Based on conversations with the San Francisco Bay region and US EPA, the most successful efforts to date have been those where agencies collaboratively work together to implement short and long-term solutions versus taking enforcement actions. These efforts include short-term actions to address potential discharge of human waste, trash, and debris from entering surface waters, and long-term plans to address the legal camping. Other agencies have also acknowledged that the problem will not be eliminated through cleanup efforts alone and have implemented programs to provide housing, employment, placement, and other support. Our goal is to learn from these efforts and to develop short-term and long-term solutions to address the potential water quality issues in our region and the associated dumping of trash and debris below the ordinary high water mark. Our next steps include a proposed monitoring plan that will be conducted in coordination with Sacramento County, local cities, and the Sacramento Area Sewer District. The monitoring is designed to help assess the potential risks to public health and a better understanding of the sources. The sources could include wildlife, domestic pets, recreational users, homeless encampments, MS4s, and sanitary sewer overflows. The results of the study will help us identify the next step to address this potential water quality issue. In addition, we are preparing a frequently asked question document that will provide contact information for how citizens can report the location of illegally dumped trash and responses to frequently asked questions. We're also working with a facilitator to identify stakeholders for upcoming meeting that's planned to be held late this winter. We're currently targeting to hold the first meeting in late February or early March. The stakeholders identified to date include state and regional water boards, county health directors, local stormwater agencies, other state and federal agencies, environmental groups, citizens groups, and homeless advocacy groups. Next, we have Jeff Leatherman with the County of Sacramento Parks Department, who will provide a presentation on their ongoing efforts.
Nicole,
Yes.
do we have data on sanitary sewer overflows? I mean, can we rule those out for the time periods? I mean, that seems like something we would know, and what other factors can we rule out or not in as of right now?
We do have data on sanitary sewer overflows. I have not looked at that data here recently, so I can't quite answer that question, but definitely we do have data, and we can take that into consideration as we're looking at this study.
And when you say domestic animals, are you just saying, is this just basically dogs running along the?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes. Well, yeah, and, it could be feral cats out there.
Oh.
Well,
But don't you also have, when you have stormwater entering the river, don't you also have the issue of cats and dogs in the general area from where the stormwater comes from?
Yes, that's very true. Yes. As there, especially during that first flush, like Alicia showed, where there was in elevated levels, we do expect that during the first flush from a, MS4 system.
Bob?
In this case, Nicole, and your team, when we talk about the American River as a wild and scenic river, the title of the Wilderness or the River Acts are wild and scenic and recreational rivers, and there's different segments of different rivers. They can be one or all of those different pieces. And I just ask that because when you think about the American River, while it may have scenic sections, it's certainly a recreational river.
Yes.
The other is West Sacramento's done a lot of work in the last couple of years, I know, with homeless, and I'm just suggesting you might want to include them in some of these discussions if you
Okay.
haven't already.
Thank you. We'll make sure to do that.
So, John, this is Adam. Just to respond also, we've asked our staff in the compliance and enforcement section to start pulling data together on overflows in the last few years there.
Any further comments or questions? Thank you.
Okay. I will turn it over to Jeff Leatherman with the County of Sacramento Parks Department.
Thank you for having me, Chair and Board. Jeff Leatherman, Director of Regional Parks for Sacramento County. I'm glad to be here to provide some information. As I'm running through the presentation, should you have any questions about context, I tend to start talking about the American River and my park facilities in a very familiar way. And so if I need to slow down or stop me if you've got a question, please. I would be remiss in talking about the regional park system if I didn't point out that we manage about 15,000 acres in Sacramento County. We'll be discussing the American River and the Dry Creek Parkway, but we also manage many golf courses, small park facilities in the south part of the county, as well as some open space throughout the regional park system. So as we stated earlier, as we start to focus in on the American River Parkway, the confluence of the American River at Discovery, Discovery Park at Sacramento and American River, is where essentially mile 0 begins for my park system. We go up to mile 23, which is the Hazel crossing, and as was stated earlier, the state takes over from there. Roughly about 4,000 acres of managed property within the American River. Also, as part of this conversation is the Dry Creek Parkway. That starts on the north part of the county at Gibson Ranch, runs through the Dry Creek system, and ends just in the Rio Linda, Alberta community. This parkway also connects down into the Steelhead Creek area, which you'll see in the next map. So the star represents kind of the Steelhead Creek space where regional parks jurisdiction begins, but in this map you'll also see the North Sacramento County Creek and Drainage System. And so in the north part of the county, all the way through the Dry Creek area, eventually flows down into Steelhead Creek and terminates in the American River Parkway, and then eventually into the Sacramento River. The arrow again there at Steelhead Creek, and regional parks jurisdiction begins where El Camino crosses. And if you can see there on the map, is essentially the second crossing of Steelhead Creek near the American River Parkway. And that's the defined parkway boundary. It is also the defined by county property ownership in that section of Steelhead Creek. If you were to go north from the El Camino crossing, other jurisdictions such as SAFCA, RD1000, City of Sacramento take over the management responsibility and flood control responsibilities of Steelhead Creek. As was stated earlier, we do have camping and illegal camping happening in the Steelhead Creek area. This will just give you a little bit of a perspective in that space. So this is kind of a direct view of where the arrow was on the map, just before the Arden Garden connector. And this was on the 9th of January when we had our first big rainstorm move through the system. This was trash related to illegal camping that had moved up the riverbank there on the levee. And the following days, we spent about a day and a half cleaning that space up. And so we do have trash in the area. We continue to have trash in that space as it relates to illegal camping. As you look at the entirety of the picture of illegal camping, and I'll give some more numbers in detail here momentarily, but we really look at the park system and the parkway. The lower 6 miles, so Discovery Park up to about the Campus Commons Golf Course, the lower 6 miles being on the multi-use trail is where we see the highest concentration of our illegal camping. But the stars also represent some other areas in the park system where we see a significant amount of illegal camping. So the Dry Creek Parkway, the area where Howe crosses the American River, the area where a walk crosses the American River, and then also Riverbend Park. The reality is, however, there isn't really a spot on the American River where we don't see illegal camping. These circles represent all of the trash sites in 2017 that we cleaned up. 1,619 to be specific in the park system. You'll also see some area around Rancho Murrieta. But the concentration of that is in the lower 6 miles of the American River. And you can kind of see as the circles start to overlap, the darker blue represents where we see the majority of our camping-related trash. Now, this isn't our recreation-related trash. This isn't trash cans that we've emptied as it relates to people using the river or the parkway. This is specific to either camping or illegal dumping. And I want to say, too, that we have trash in our park system that we know is not directly related to camping. We have people that come and drop off couches and mattresses and trash and other things that come into that system. And we tend to be sometimes the dumping ground for those pieces as well. So as I move through the rest of the presentation, what you'll see from my staff is our park resource team, and if you hear me use that term, that's also my park rangers. We have a total of 15 rangers right now assigned to illegal camping in the regional park system. We have our debris removal team, which is my maintenance team. We have a total of 18 maintenance staff people assigned to that team. And then you'll hear occupied versus unoccupied camp. And it's important just to know that we do have some regulations that we have to deal with when we're enforcing illegal camping in our regional park system. An occupied camp, we can issue a citation from a law enforcement officer and order that person out of that camp and clean up right behind them. If we have an unoccupied camp, we have to issue a 24-hour notice. We have to wait those 24 hours. We have to return to that camp, or excuse me, 48 hours. We have to return to that 48-hour notice. If the camp has been cleaned up by the occupant, then we can clean up the trash. If the camp hasn't been cleaned up, we have to store that equipment in that tent, sleeping bag, or any other personal property for 90 days. Once we store that equipment, then we can clean up the trash behind it. So we do have some regulations that we have to work in, but that continues to propel us, if you will, that unfortunately we continue to have work to do. We will see more occupied and unoccupied camps throughout the regional park system, despite our enforcement efforts.
Jeff, are those
Sorry, yeah, John.
Are those regulations county, city?
So the
state?
regulations related to the occupied versus unoccupied
Yes.
camp comes out of a Marin agreement, which is essentially a legal settlement that the county entered into when we were sued by some homeless individuals. And so that's where you get the 48-hour notice requirement. Some priorities as we move into 2018. The teams will concentrate on the American River and Dry Creek Parkways for the sheer purpose that that's where we see our illegal camping and dumping. Teams will concentrate in the areas that are affected most by illegal camping with the debris, and then teams will be spread from into 7 days a week. As you see my next few slides, you'll see the funding in the graphing chart, and the 7 days a week is a change for us that we haven't been doing in the past. So the financial commitment. Over the past couple of years, and I've been here with the county since 2012, we've seen the financial commitment related to regional parks and related to my department rise from 2014, just over $500,000, up to $3.5 million. That is the money that is currently dedicated by the Sacramento County Board of Supervisors to regional parks specific to illegal camping and illegal dumping. So in totality, that number is much larger countywide. This is just focused on the American River Parkway, Dry Creek Parkway, and some of our outlining parks and facilities. The biggest jump that we saw was in September of 2017. A lot of news media and a lot of press related to the increases that my department saw, and you'll see that in our ranger staff as well as our maintenance staff in the next two slides. Any questions about this before I move on to this point? So what that looks like from a ranger perspective, we've gone from 2 full-time staff members in 2014 to 15 in 2017. Now, these are rangers that are focused specifically on illegal camping and illegal dumping. They don't do recreation-related enforcement unless they overlap, and at times they will. From a maintenance staff perspective, and there's a small error in this slide, in 2017, we were still at 4. I don't know why I dropped down, but we're up to 18 staff members now on the maintenance side, and that's broken into 4 teams.
Sorry, one more question. And
Yeah, please.
those funds are general fund? Are they?
That's a great question. So you have a combination, primarily general fund, but we also have support from our water quality and water resources division. They help fund dumpsters for us removing trash out of the park system. We also have funding from regional sanitation, which I'll talk about and Christoph will talk about. We also have funding from our waste management department. Waste management funds our program right now in about the $150,000 range. Water resources, about $60,000 or $70,000 for dumpsters. The remainder of that is general fund money. So the lion's share of it, 95% of it. In addition to my maintenance staff work, we also brought in, on a temporary basis, under a pilot program, a contract debris removal program. We solicited for contracts to help us in the upper portions of the American River, and if you've been on the Parkway, you'll know that in this portion of the river, we have a lot of small trails and a lot of places where it's difficult to access with heavy equipment. So Pride Industries was the successful bidder of this contract, and to date, since August when they first started to December 29, they've pulled 2,168 bags of trash out of the upper portions of the American River. This is all in the watershed. The lion's share of their work has been around the Howe area, and if you remember, Discovery Park is kind of the higher concentration of illegal camping, and it moves east through the river. Howe is kind of one of the first areas just outside of mile 6, and we still see a fairly high concentration of illegal camping in that area, which tends to trend with the numbers that you see here, where they're able to pull more bags of trash out in this area. In addition to the Pride contract, we also have great support from a variety of partners, including the American River Parkway Foundation. The foundation organizes many volunteer events. The Great American River Cleanup, they've pulled 27,000 pounds of trash out of the park system. We have our ongoing Mile Steward program. This is Adopt a Mile. They pulled 62,000 pounds of trash out. We have our spring cleanups, 4,000 pounds of trash, and the island cleanups. And this is areas that are specifically usually in around the Howe and Wad areas where we have islands on the American River that will flood during high water events. It takes a little bit specialty, a little bit of a time and specialty equipment. We used a helicopter this year to pull trash off of some of those islands where we can't normally access it. What will happen is some of our illegal campers will essentially row boats out to the islands, set up their camp, and then we have to spend the time and energy to get to them. We just cleared about 7 tons of trash out over the last 2 days on some islands around Watt. So in general, this is kind of what you see, some of the photos earlier. This is our maintenance team working a camp area. These are the before and after shots when we're doing a cleanup. We've transitioned into some heavier equipment, and you'll start to see it show up in the back. But 2014, 2015, we were largely a hand pull operation, meaning we were doing almost everything by hand. The volume of trash that we've been dealing with and the access areas that we've been dealing with, we've moved on to some heavier equipment so that we can really start to pull higher volumes of trash out at a quicker pace. It also keeps my staff much safer. So we now have 4 of those Bobcats that you see in the photos, working about 5 days a week with 2 of our teams as we continue to train our others. And that's resulted in just over 546 tons of trash being removed from the park system in 2017. During 2017, we had 2 of those Bobcats working the majority of the year. Coming into 18, we'll have 4 of those, so you can imagine we'll start to see some higher numbers of trash being pulled out of the system to a point, and then hopefully we'll start to see that trash decrease as our partners in the homelessness response start to work on housing and other pieces of the continuum of care. So just some of the quick numbers from 2017, issued 1,300 illegal camping citations. We've contacted about 1,700 camps, 204 arrests, and there's the 445 tons of trash removed out of the park system. As we talked about, and Christoph will mention, the equipment to the right, and there's been some discussion about human waste. We recognized in 2017 that we didn't have a good system to deal with human waste in the camps. Sometimes you'll hear 3-gallon buckets of human waste, 5-gallon buckets, but we really didn't have a good way to handle those. Through a partnership with Sacramento, help me, Christoph. Thank you, Regional Sand. Got myself sidetracked. With Regional Sand, they funded 2 of those pieces of equipment, so the John Deere and also the pumps associated with it. That's going to allow my staff essentially to deploy those pieces of equipment out into the park system. They hold about 100 gallons of waste, so we'll be pulling waste out of those smaller containers and being able to transfer it out of the park system. So just a couple of other frequently asked questions. Can we kick people out of the parkways? the park system is open to the public regardless of your housing situation. So we can enforce camping citations, but we can't completely remove people out of the park system. What happens when they move? Do they just move someplace else in the parkways? And yes, largely we see the movement of homeless people around our park system. They're not always completely moved out of the parkways, but they do move to other locations. Fires are not allowed in our parkways. And alcohol is allowed in some circumstances, but not anywhere within the city limits of Sacramento. So when you're in the unincorporated county area, alcohol is allowed in our park systems, but not within the boundaries of the city of Sacramento. That concludes my presentation. Again, I know that I start talking about the parkway stuff and I go pretty quick. So if you have questions, I'd be happy to entertain them or answer them for you.
Questions? Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Next, we have Christoph Dobson with the Sacramento Area Sewer District and Regional SAN.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Christoph Dobson. I'm the Director of Policy and Planning for Regional SAN and the Sacramento Area Sewer District. And together, we provide wastewater collection service for about 1.2 million residents in the Sacramento region, and then wastewater treatment services for about 1.4 million. I'm excited to talk a little bit about our Confluence Regional Partnership Program. It's a grant program that we have recently developed. It's a broad-based program. It has a number of different elements to it, but one in particular that I wanted to talk about today is the waterway protection efforts. So a little bit of background on the Confluence program. These are discretionary funds that they don't come from rates and fees, so we have the ability to do a little bit more with them. It's basically some of the money comes from interest on our reserves, also the sale of biogas and recycled water, some of these miscellaneous revenue sources. It's actually quite a lot of money. There's $7 million annually that's pulled from this non-rate, non-fee revenue. Our board of directors, both of our boards, have approved policies that essentially direct how we might use some of this money. And then finally, just a note on the name Confluence. We call it Confluence because it reflects the two rivers, our Sacramento and American rivers coming together in Confluence. It's also our two districts coming together. And then finally, our districts together working with local public agencies and non-governmental organizations to benefit the region. So that's the idea behind Confluence.
Christoph, it's John. So the $7 million is the Confluence budget, not the waterway protection effort budget?
Correct.
Okay.
And I will get into that in a moment, the budget just for the waterway. So there are 5 program areas. I'm going to primarily talk about the environmental stewardship, but I also just wanted to mention that we also have quite a bit of the money goes towards our rate assistance for low-income customers. We also have funding for regional economic development and then public education, and there's kind of a catch-all category at the end that hits other issues or other projects. So environmental stewardship, the budget for that is up to $1.5 million annually. The budget is also broken down further into a couple of, or 3 key points. First one being American River Parkway that we're talking about today and related to water quality specifically. And it actually has an at least $600,000. So that's a minimum number that we're supposed to be spending on an annual basis. We also have $600,000 set aside for septic tank conversion to bring in properties that are connected to septic tanks and get them on the public sewer system, which also can benefit water quality. And then again, kind of the catch-all for remaining funds would go towards broader watershed management. So just talk a little bit about some of the projects. Sacramento County Parks, as Jeff talked about quite a bit. We are funding some of the specialized equipment that will be and is being used for hazardous and human waste cleanup in the parkway. Also some of the contract labor as well. So we're providing some resources there. Obviously, Jeff talked about his staff. They're doing really a huge, tremendous effort, and we're just pitching in to help out with that effort. Also pitching in with the American River Parkway Foundation, we've put some money together for them to fund some of the island and river cleanup events. Also, I think Jeff mentioned those as well, and some of the equipment they will be using for invasive plant removal. We've also put some money towards Yolo County to help clean up some abandoned boats on the Sacramento River. That's also a problem. They can often contain hazardous or human waste. And so it's not only an environmental hazard, it can also be a safety hazard when these boats sink or halfway submerge like the one in this picture. I mentioned the septic conversion. We're working with the community of Freeport right now, and this is actually really good that we're also working with the State Water Board. Some of the Prop 1 funding is available for, again, converting septic systems over to the public sewer. And so we've applied for a grant that potentially could provide 75% of the funding for this project. And we're kicking in, as well as the County of Sacramento, kicking in other funds to make this project go. A lot of the septic conversion, the obstacle to septic conversion is just very expensive to do. So this is a project that looks like it's going to move forward, and they're right next to the river. There's definitely some potential water quality issues that we could take care of there. And then the final project is our project that we've just been talking a little bit about. We're going to help out with the Regional Water Board, both in the area of providing a facilitator and then also helping to fund some of the study that Alicia mentioned earlier today. So those are the projects that we're working on, and that's all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Thank you very much, sir.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christoph. Next, we have Ryan Lufborough with Sacramento Steps Forward.
Chairman, members of the council, my name is Ryan Lufborough. I'm CEO for Sacramento Steps Forward. We're a nonprofit that are dedicated to ending homelessness here in Sacramento through innovation, collaboration, and connecting individuals with the services and housing that they need. I thought today, just in the interest of putting the challenge in some type of framework, because I think when folks think of homelessness, it just gets to be too much. On all of our drives to work and interactions with folks, it seems like it's hard to get our head around it. On the West Coast, we're a bit unique today. We do have some similar issues within New York City and those areas, but you'll notice that on the West Coast, we have approximately a third of the nation's homeless. Those are our people. They are Californians that are becoming homeless. When you start to look at the causes, so in my world, my job is to find individuals experiencing homelessness, work with them towards the pursuit of getting housed and stable. The thing that causes individuals to become homeless is the difference between you and I that may have a good support system, both in our friends, family, extended family and friends, of faith, of work. When the underpinnings of those support systems begin to crumble, that's when individuals fall into a state of homelessness. And today, the greatest cause of that is the economy. So since the 80s, the cost of living has outstripped the amount that a low-wage earner can make. And the further that gap becomes, the more likely that individuals that are in those situations of having weak support systems, that they'll become homeless. And today you see that even happen on a much larger scale than we have seen historically. The other challenge is, in my world, is not sometimes the money from the federal government that we apply for. We actually in Sacramento get about $20 million. Majority of that pays for housing tonight for individuals that have been housed over time. But as there's turnover and you have that voucher, and it seems like, we got the money, I got the will, I need the place. It's the place. That's the 2 to 3% vacancy rate in any one of our communities. I'd worked down in San Diego for about 3 years. My background's actually managing downtown, so this public space management I understand. It is that lack of housing capacity that really stymies our best efforts on the ground to get high housing placement. Now, I tell you that because we're going to bring it right down to the edge of the river, if you will. And I realized as folks talked, all of my analogies are river-based, so forgive me. Working with individuals in a state of homelessness in that environment are doing just what we would all do, satisfying Maslow's first layer of having shelter, having water and food, and having companionship. We all do that. And these folks find that throughout the U.S. in places like these waterways because they're very accommodating. And so the best effort that we put forward is combining both the mitigation of impacts homelessness has on community. So Jeff Leatherman, whose team I truly appreciate as a user of the American River Parkway, that is vitally important to address the impacts this population will have on the environment. We need to add to that tactic a tool that will have an impact on homelessness within the person. Because if we can solve that, then we solve the broader problem. We just need to have the ability to do that repetitively on a large scale. So locally and throughout California, actually really throughout the U.S., a great model is when we partner with law enforcement, with maintenance, outreach personnel that can really address those issues, addressing the individual, and then the collective family that's formed on the street. And locally, we have navigators that my shop manages here in Rancho Cordova. David Elliott's my guy. He works right alongside code enforcement and sheriff's departments here in Rancho Cordova. Our housing placement rate's about 5 to 7 a month with each one of our outreach personnel. The County of Sacramento now is deploying what they call the HOT team, Homeless Outreach Team. And you'll see that in many of our law enforcements today where they repurpose an officer to really do a lot more of the social work. And so they go out in a meaningful way and contact a person. So it's that pipeline from the edge of the river to have someone that's addressing the impact of homelessness on the person and problem solving with that person in the place where you find them, all the way back up to housing capacity. And our success is directly linked to reducing inflow, meaning the economy, where our citizens can afford a place to live, and it's directly linked to having capacity to house. So my recommendation moving forward is to continue with the short-term kind of block and tackle tactics you have to have in place of enforcement and maintenance, but also combine that with the outreach and really an understanding that to make a meaningful change and reduction in that population, we have to get people connected back to housing, back to support systems, and that is an arduous task that happens one person at a time, but we cannot get there without that type of process. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Questions? Yes, John?
So do you have a rough number of the homeless population in Sacramento?
We did a one-time count back last year. It was 3,665. The vast majority of those were unsheltered, so you have over 2,000 individuals on that night alone that we counted within Sacramento. And you can look, it's called the point-in-time count. You can find that for all of your jurisdictions. Your continuums of care have to do that every other year as a full count. And probably over the course of a year, we would double that number roughly. And our numbers for our central database showed over 7,000 households in 2016 came into our system.
Thank you.
You double that number, are you talking about the winter months or the summer months? Or?
Sure, that count has to happen in the odd years, and it's a mandate from HUD as a recipient of HUD dollars. So that always happens in the latter part of January. And for us, the number increased by 30%, and I thought, gosh, we're in trouble in Sacramento. I put up my 30% out there. The truth is, that was the realization throughout California and really on the West Coast.
What proportion of these are working homeless, and is this rate of working homeless increasing?
I don't have a specific number on working homeless, but I know anecdotally our partners in San Francisco have cited that. Sam Dodge is a gentleman that I work with a bit over there, and they are seeing a lot more of the working class homeless. And when I was in San Diego working with their downtown, we saw that as well. They had a storage facility that was put together during my time there, and I was surprised to see how many folks work in construction trade. We're dropping off construction equipment at night and then picking it up in the morning to head to work. Yeah, so a lot of times I also say I need more affordable housing, but we can work up that pipe further and say we need housing for our working class citizens, because if they don't have the support structure and they're paying other fees, then they may fall in that state of homelessness.
Right, thank you. Any further questions, comments? Very interesting, very informative, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Now Dr. Brady would like to share his concerns with the board. Chair Longley, Dr. Brady has some photos that he would like to show the board. Would that be acceptable?
Go ahead, please.
My name is Roland Brady. I'm a geologist and a technical advisor for the Sacramento Area Creeks Council, and I'm out on the river at least 2 times a week. And I just wanted to point out a few elements of this particular issue that haven't been brought up before. I don't want to beleaguer the points that have been made. The example I'm using is Steelhead Creek, and this is Steelhead Creek right here during the summer. After the high flows, this is what the Steelhead Creek looks like below the mean high water mark. And not all of this debris is indigenous to Steelhead Creek. Steelhead Creek receives debris, everything that washes down from the upper tributaries too. So the material that Jeff's crew are trying to clean up is not just the campsites themselves, but it's inherited material that continue to comes down. And as the campers move from place to place, they set up other camps, so it's a moving target. So it's not simply a matter of going in and cleaning up a camp and it stays clean. Within a few days, it can end up as a very dirty camp too. This is a very typical example of one of the abandoned camps below the high water mark of Steelhead Creek, as is this. And the kinds of materials that are in that debris, it's often looked at as being an aesthetic issue. And there's a certain political pressure that's going on with the cleaning up the homeless camps, or why are you criminalizing the homeless people, displacing them? They're not really causing any harm. They're not hurting anybody. Just leave them alone. And there's a significant population that holds that view, and sometimes parks and the rangers get the brunt of that. But if you look at typical material in those trash piles, you see there's solvents and motor oil here for the generators and outboard motors too. They're detergents. There's spray paint. There's a lot of illegal bicycle work going on, so paint is a very common product here. There are lead acid batteries. Many of the camps have LED lights at night, and even music, so batteries are very common. And pesticides that are used to deflea these camps. So it's not just a matter of an aesthetic issue, but there's everybody's favorite here, of course, are the toilets. These buckets, every single camp has one of these buckets. And when they get about half full, the occupants dump them into the creek or the river and then bring them back out and use them again. Now, this is an example. I picked this up yesterday. This is from one camp. That's about 4 inches deep of sharps from one single camp. And all of this becomes entrained in the water when the debris flows. As well as those images I showed you, there's an enormous amount of plastic that gets washed down. And even though plastic is seen, again, as visual blight, there's a lot of work that's been done in the recent years to show the effects of styrene and polyethylene nanoplastic particles that are ingested by freshwater and marine organisms. And so there's a significant impact, not only on the algae and the bacteria, but on the micro insects, the food and the food chain, and the larger animals ingest this stuff. And there are minks and otters and numerous other animals in the system that ingest this stuff. Okay, so the last slides didn't show up. So I think what makes this oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. And so this is after the high flow. All of this was below the mean high water line, but as the waters rise, we're not talking flood waters that'll wash an enormous quantity of debris in. This is just along, right below the mean high water line. Now all of this is entrained and gets into the Sacramento River and the American River. So I think the priority really needs to be to clean up this lower level debris first. This is after the first flood. All that material we've been looking at has been redistributed along the lower floodplain. Looks like this. And this pile of trash, I worked yesterday with 2 homeless people. This took 4 hours to accumulate this pile of trash just from the area that you see back there. And it's in a threatened situation because when the water rises, this will all be mobile too. So as fast as parks can work, and they have the main responsibility for cleaning this up, it's an overwhelming job because it's a moving target and all this debris is coming in. So one of the things that I've noticed on the flyer you have that has this is a priority issue to work collaboratively with the local authorities and entities. I'd like to know what that actually means to work collaboratively, what all is involved in that, because unlike most of the discharges you've been dealing with, this is not a one-time deal. This is a management issue that's going to go on for years. And I mean, I don't really see any end in sight where we can say, okay, we've done it, we've cleaned it all up, we can walk away from it. So it's really an intractable problem that I think is going to require collaboration with the state and the feds too. And not just here, it's all over the state. So, thank you.
Any questions for Dr. Brady? Thank you, Roland.
Okay, thank you. Let's see here. Okay, so in conclusion, board staff are coordinating with a working group to prepare a frequently asked question document that will also provide contact information of how to report illegally dumped trash. In addition, we're working with the County of Sacramento, Region San, and an outside facilitator to identify stakeholders for a meeting that will be held late this winter. Our goal is to learn from other efforts throughout the state and to collaboratively work together to identify both short and long-term solutions to address the potential water quality issues in our region and the dumping of illegal trash and debris below the ordinary high water mark. To reiterate, this is a very complex issue and it's one of our big societal problems. To address the issue, we can't simply just clean it up in one time and solve the issue. We'll need to address it collaboratively, and that's what we're planning to do through the stakeholder coordination. And so then also based on conversations with US EPA, the most successful efforts to date have been those that consider homeless advocacy groups and others in the solution. So we're all here if you have any questions.
Questions?
So the FAQ is aimed at who?
It's whichever.
The FAQ is aimed at essentially not just people outside of the water board or the public, but also it's aimed at those collaborators and others that we want to try and bring in and into the discussion. You know, what we typically will get is we'll get a call from somebody and you know, depending on which staff person in the office takes it, depending on where things are at, this is such a large issue and there's so many different players in the game that we want to make sure that, you know, we know who to contact and who to talk to. A great example is with county parks. If you get a call and say, hey, there's trash at this location, once we established contact with Jeff Leatherman over there, I was able to call him up and say, hey, you know, I'm getting this location here. Are you guys aware of this? And get you know, things moving. So it really a communications document.
And we heard from Jeff and others the dollars they're spending. Do we have a budget number what we're spending?
We are working on that. I talked to Alicia about that. The parts we're spending on is the E. coli study. We'll be collecting the samples for E. coli and running those samples at the locations within the river. I don't know if we've got a dollar amount quite yet.
And there's a collaborative effort, Nicole, I understand that. Is there a lead agency, or is it, who's actually, is there someone in charge, or is it a group effort?
That is an excellent question.
I think I think the laugh that you just got answered your question.
So at this moment, the water board is taking the lead of getting the group together. One of the very first things, we'll be identifying who should take the primary lead as this moves forward and evolves.
Well, I commend staff on working towards providing leadership here. Obviously, there needs to be somebody who coordinates and pulls things together, some group of people that does that. There's a couple of parts of this that are overlapping, as you pointed out, slide 5. And I am very interested in the results you get from the study. We can guess what those results are going to show. I do think that we are going to see that, I think we've seen evidence of it, we're going to see that there is human fecal matter which enters the system, which has a significant impact more than likely. But past experience tells us that the river is insulted by more than that. There is other sources, and I think that's going to be a very important study for getting a handle on those sources, all of them. The other part of this, though, is that I'd like to see some innovation in developing approaches to collecting those human wastes and other waste products. You saw those Sharpies, I think you call them, but the syringes that were out there. I don't know if this has been attempted elsewhere. I guess the first thing is you don't want to reinvent the wheel if someone's already invented it, and it would be nice to know if there's experiences elsewhere that would provide a template for us to more efficiently and more quickly address this issue. But I think it's going to take some innovation. Now, obviously, it was pointed out we have to find shelter, but that's not within the purview of this board. This board doesn't have that ability. I know the mayor of Sacramento. I live in Fresno, but it makes it all the way down to Fresno what the mayor of Sacramento is doing in this area, and I commend him for that. It's going to take, and that's innovative, by the way, his small house approach. I think that we got to get out of the box on this one and really find innovative ways and working together. And I heard the laugh on who's leading this. It's going to take folks stepping forward to provide the needed leadership to keep this thing going. Funding's a big part of that, and how do you identify the viable funding sources, pull them together, is a real big important part. Most folks are going to be out there working hard to solve problems in the field, but it's going to take some people who have the ability to address the financial requirements to get this done. So it is a big problem. That's pointed out. It's a national, statewide, and local problem. But I'm hearing today that a third of the homeless in the U.S. are in California. So there's a lot on our shoulders to be able to address it. Any other comments?
Dr. Longley, if I
Yes.
can just say something.
I have some interested persons want to talk also.
Okay,
So.
I just wanted to say, we ask who the lead is, but really, the board is here because it is a water quality concern. But it's complicated by all the factors that are
yes.
involved. And so we will be engaged. What we're trying to tell the board and the public is there's been some who have demanded that we take enforcement, and that really, in my opinion, and unless you guide us otherwise, that we do stay on the more collaborative approach because of the issues, but we would have to stay engaged in really, we're sort of like the fire under this to address the water quality issues, to make sure our laws are complied with. But we have to be considerate of the fact that we have a population in an area that it's not like we can just pick them up and move them and then be gone with the problem. So, there's people need shelter, and so we just need to make sure that there's ways that we can make it so their trash and their debris is collected in a way that it's not impacting or harming others or our critters that live in the waters.
And that was my call for getting outside the box and innovation.
Pamela, I'm very supportive of the collaborative effort. I'm just curious, what would enforcement even look like?
Region 2 tried, and it really does fail when you try to be the hard-nosed regulator in this, because it's just almost impossible.
Would
to
we be
do.
regulating the individual?
Well, it's going after the counties and the cities.
It's the other governmental agencies for which this is to a large degree an unfunded mandate. And so, you know, we always had the big stick, but how do you use it appropriately is the question. And, you know, as long as they're on track to try to solve the problem, I'd rather work cooperatively with them.
We've got the right players in place right now. We could add somewhere like a health department, things like that, so we
Right.
can make sure that we address the syringes and things that are pretty much dangerous to a lot of individuals. So we'll keep working on this. I think that's why staff is working on this. So I don't think, I know that's why staff is working on this.
I mean, in that regard, I think what we really need to start with is a more detailed planning strategic document for the board, but I think the board is this, as you said, this small piece of the overall approach. So as this collaborative process goes forward with the facilitator, I would look forward to a product out of that as a plan where the agreement between the different governmental entities, the water board and others is put together to address the problem, to move towards a solution. I don't know that we ever get there either, but I think we have to use the tools we have to the best ability we can, and it's already happening. I mean, we don't have to wait for the plan. I mean, the SANS helping the Park District and the governmental agencies are currently working together, and that's a big part of the plan. So I think we have a really good start. I appreciate staff's work here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Denise, did you want to say something? I saw you reaching for the button.
It's a serious issue. I mean, in my career, I dealt with the homeless issue back in the 80s and 90s and 2000, and we're still, it's bigger. It's bigger. But as Dr. Longley mentioned a while ago, being innovative. So whatever short-term, long-term solutions can come out of the collaborative efforts with the county health, or where we're dealing with the needles, how can we address dealing with the needles issue? I mean, that's one. With the sanitation issue, what is it that what agencies, sanitation can do to handle situations like that? I don't know. Porta potties, what's the solution? But there's gotta be, we have to look at it from a short range, long-term solutions and all the in-betweens to address it, to get us to where we're trying to get, and that's to deal with water quality. And that long-term solution is the bottom line, housing and jobs for people that stand in need. So you do have a task, but I do certainly appreciate all the presentations that were presented today and highlighting the issues that we're facing, and the collaborative effort is what it's going to take to try to look at addressing these problems. Thank you very much for your presentation.
And you talked about the in-between. I've worked with some of the EJ folks in Southern California also, and where we have just humongously high costs of living. And you see retired people who can't afford to live anymore where they have been during their working life, moving into disadvantaged communities, and that's the next step down. If they can't afford it there, they end up on the street. We have folks moving into this region, living on fixed incomes, very low fixed incomes, in mobile homes, situations of that nature, and they've been a problem for us in the past insofar as water and wastewater discharges that they have that are not properly treated. So we have this societal problem of how do you provide the infrastructure, the means for people to from our standpoint, very narrow focus standpoint here, have the means to dispose of their waste products, whether it be human waste or other waste, in a manner that's not going to harm the environment. And that's going to take some real innovative thinking, in my opinion.
So, thanks, Carl. I appreciate all that. I had a question, maybe it was for Christoph. The non-discretionary funds, I would think there's an impact to the operation of your facilities from, is there a cost to operate the facility that if you were to take some of even the fee money and direct it over, then you would see a savings on the operational side? Is that something you've thought about, or is that not possible?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure where you're going with that.
So it sounded like the only monies available are the non-rate based, but
Right.
if there's a benefit to the operation of the system, could you rate base any of those funds?
Absolutely. So, okay, I see what you're saying. So the reason we're using non-rate, non-fee money is because the money that we do collect from ratepayers needs to go towards providing them service. Now, that's a pretty broad thing that you can pull a lot of different things into, but if you were to be able to show that it could reduce our cost in some way, then certainly that would be a perfectly good use of rate money. So yes, it would, but it'd have to have that nexus, that tie back. Yeah.
Yes.
So my question, I don't know, it might be more tied into the gentleman from Steps Forward. And this is from my experience, and I come from Merced County, and a lot of things that we're dealing with are not, I mean, some of it is economic, a lot of it is mental health, and a lot of it is, sort of, this is what I choose, and so not necessarily interested in structure programs and things like that. So I imagine that's an additional, certainly the mental health and the free choice thing make it additionally complex to deal with issues like this. So, to the extent that it's a water quality issue, then sure that is within our purview. But, it's such a large scale issue that it's hard to really know how to help.
Yes, sir.
I would agree, and I think we'd look at the challenge in layers, and currently the hardest driving factor are the economics. Ultimately, if the economics were better and the cost of living was a little closer to what a wage earner, then we might be dealing more with the outcomes of mental health, addiction as more of the drivers. But we wouldn't see the crisis situation that we have now with so many people experiencing homelessness. Those are always elements that are part of the mix, but right now the hardest driving factor is just the economics.
And maybe that's, and for me, those other elements are more present because during my time at the city, certainly our contact was more with law enforcement, and so
Right.
a lot of that was, free choice mental health, maybe, the economics.
Yeah.
People who are following the rules don't have as much, say, interaction with PD. But if you had to ballpark it and you had to sort of categorize the large chunks of what gets people to the situation, I mean, do you think it's overwhelmingly economic? And then,
Carmen,
yeah,
I think that's a little out of our bailiwick, and
I agree.
would like to hear from the public.
I agree. But can you ballpark it? And then I'll close with that.
I say the vast majority is economically driven. 50% typically, 50% will say it's addiction and mental health is part of their condition, but economics is the driving factor. Yep. And those that would say they choose, they need someone that can meet them where they are. I have staff that work for me that have been homeless 8, 10, 12 years. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to interested persons. William Templin. Then following Mr. Templin, Betsy Weiland.
Yes, welcome. Thank you all for having me here. Very interesting talks, and I've been out on Steelhead Creek quite a bit in the last few months, and Arcade Creek upstream there. I live in the Arcade Creek watershed. I'm here representing primarily the local chapter of Trout Unlimited because of the anadromous fishery that comes through Steelhead Creek and goes up into Arcade Creek, Dry Creek, and some of these upper streams. I just wanted to focus on a couple of 9 items that I thought were left off. The first one is my history is 30 years with the USGS here in California, 10 years with the state government, partially here in the regional board and partially with Department of Water Resources. And I know for a fact that DWR, Department of Water Resources, is monitoring Steelhead Creek, and they have been since the turn of the century. So they're continuing to monitor Arcade Creek, and I didn't see them on the list of state contributors, so you might want to add them. I know that there's a TMDL down in the LA River, I believe, for trash, the only one in the state, I think. I wonder, I guess you would have to have the facts on the quantities of the type and the types of debris before you establish a TMDL for trash, but I wondered if anybody had looked at that yet and started to think about that, implementing that here in this area. Let's see, the Arcade Creek area does contribute a lot of trash, and there's a lot of homeless along that area too, and it drains into Steelhead Creek about a mile upstream of the boundary that Jeff was talking about. And we've been doing a lot on Arcade Creek. A lot of the local residents have been taking a very active role in helping to work with the campers and work with the regulatory agencies to clean up the areas, as well as regular cleanup practices. So some of the successes, as you were saying, Dr. Langley, of what's been done before that could be implemented here, don't forget to see what else is going on. That's the DWR and the upstream Arcade Creek activities are two. Population survey, what I'm hearing is we don't really know, we don't survey the population of campers frequently enough. It seems to me we've been out talking to a lot of the campers in the last couple months, and some of them just come in for the weekend to visit their relatives and hang out there. Some of them are there on like because they want to. Some of them have fixed income, Social Security and various things, so they're willing to pay for showers if those facilities were available. Porta potties, someone mentioned. I've even suggested storage, the trash bins. You can haul a trash bin out there. Can we convert these campers into stakeholders? And we've talked to them about that. We've asked, would you be willing to help clean up this mess? Because they don't like to live in any, many of them don't like to live in it either. So if we can't control them existing there, can we control their contamination? That was my focus of that one. I also heard that there may be a panel forming of government agencies and stakeholders, and I'd like to represent the fisheries issues on that. I guess that's my signal. But the other issue that wasn't brought up was the habitat damage. There is illegal fire building going on and cutting vegetation for barbecues and the way they cook their meals, along with the propane tanks that are left behind and all around. So a lot of the removal of vegetation that isn't collecting debris, they're cutting the limbs off and using that for fire. You know, the shade factor is going away. Water temperature as effect on fisheries is something that is a problem, as well as the chemical contaminations. Thank you.
Good points. Thank you very much. Betsy Weiland, and then we'll have Randy Smith.
Good afternoon, Board. Thank you for your time this afternoon. My name is Betsy Weiland, and I've worked on the American River Parkway for about 17 years now, primarily with Save the American River Association, but with other groups also, like the California Native Plant Society, the American River Parkway Coalition, and others. So I just wanted to make a couple of comments. First of all, I personally greatly appreciate the time and attention you have dedicated today to this issue. It's been going on for many, many years, decades, and it's only increased in severity as the years have gone by. So, and it is a water quality issue, and so I just wanted to make just a couple of observations and points. The targets for studying potential sources for contamination were dogs, humans, and wildlife, or birds in particular, I think. You might want to add feral cats to that, especially in the lower reaches. If you talk to your city park rangers and your county park rangers, actually, we do have huge feral cat colonies, and so they might be a contributor. Secondly, in regards to what Ms. Creedon brought up regarding enforcement. Now, I personally think the track we're on is probably the best one and probably going to be the most productive one. But I just want to, as someone who's worked on issues for many years, enforcement does have its place. Enforcement even can act as a driver for a jurisdiction to properly order their priorities. So for instance, I know that when we had that huge spill on the into Lake Natoma many years ago, Folsom, and you took an enforcement action, and it was a huge fine. That, I can tell you right now, over the years, I've worked on other issues now with Folsom, the latest one being a Hinkle Creek. That That helped them focus on the problem that they had in their city, which was the maintenance and upkeep of their sewer systems, okay? They took, that fine was drastic, okay? And so they, where they might not have taken or put a lot of attention to something like that, because cities have many priorities, and they definitely were forced to focus there. So while I think collaboration is probably the most productive way to go in looking for funding sources and out-of-the-box thinking, don't discount enforcement. I really do think it does help jurisdictions. As I said, as someone who has to go down every year, and you know, parks always falls to the bottom of everybody's priorities, and especially in lean budget times. And so as someone who goes down every year on bended knee, along with a lot of the other community, to beg for parks budget so that they can deal with the tremendous issues they have, I can tell you that it would be helpful if there was some, you know, prod there. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Greatly appreciated, as I said.
Questions? Thank you very much. Randy Smith and then Nancy Kitts.
Randy Smith, I'm a resident of Sacramento. I live along Arcade Creek. I want to thank the board.
Yes, you have to get close to that microphone. You can pick it up.
Okay.
You have to be a rock star.
I want to thank this board and staff for taking this issue on. I'm a resident along Arcade Creek. I've done work trying to eliminate or reduce the amount of camping that we've had affecting Arcade Creek where we live, and has recently been going down and observing what's happening in the Steelhead Creek downstream, and doing a lot of photography of the area. It was a question of I've helped to clean up a lot of the camps along Arcade Creek, and seen a lot of the human waste that is there with the toilet paper and everything on the banks, and just wanted to say that is a very real issue. But we have been effective in parts of Arcade Creek in keeping the campers out, having, you know, getting that word out that this is not an option, and if there's a way of enforcing this strictly along our waterways. We do have a camping, illegal camping issue or homeless issue, but along the waterways is not an option where the waterways get contaminated. So I wish the board can help to push the entities that are addressing this to work on getting this solved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nancy Kitts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, board members. My name's Nancy Kitts. I work for Ion Sacramento. I'm the chair of their Open Government Committee. And on that point, I would just like to very much thank you for holding this informational meeting. I think it's unique, and I think it's singular. I don't think any other board in any other situation has done something like this, where you're willing to grapple with the issues at hand, and I admire your staff for pulling this together as well. Thank you. I would like to be involved on any outreach you may do. I've been working in North Sacramento, with activists up there, and we've been documenting various homeless encampments and various sections of the river, Steelhead Creek, Arcade Creek, etc. And we have made, documented that, and quite frankly, it is devastating when you see it up close. And part of the problem is that it's a human crisis and it's an environmental crisis as well. And most people don't get to see it. So the more light we can shed on this, I think the more able we will be to find some innovative, immediate, resolutions to help these folks. Just finally, as a citizen of North Sac, or not a citizen, but a resident of East Sac, I go to the river all the time. I walk my dog there. I walk there from my home, and I would always go I would go start, say, at the J Street Bridge, and I would walk down on either side. And no longer do I do that. Since last winter and the flooding and the debris that still exists, the immense amount of campsites down there, and I think, the concerns for the environment and the biological threats, my dog, and my friends walk only north of what? Only north of what? And if you saw Jeff's slideshow, you saw that above what there was a lot of effort put, and there was a lot of cleanup done. And it's a beautiful parkway. And if you want to go to the Lower American River, it's just the opposite. You don't want to go there. You don't want to bring your dogs there. You don't want to bring your children there. Discovery Park is empty, and it's such a beautiful place. So I think we need to recapture our parkways for everyone, and I think we need to do it in a humane way. And I think we have to keep foremost in mind that, this happened in the 60s when we had ecological crises, and we had in the Depression where we had human tragedy. And I think this is our human tragedy, and I applaud you again for having this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think human tragedy is something I take out of what you said. It truly is. My thoughts are that, first of all, I applaud staff for getting this thing underway, and I join with others in that. Will this study be completed? When will you have numbers?
So we hope to start implementing the study this summer, and I think we'd want to continue monitoring for at least 1 year. But
Okay.
we should have results, and we can review the results as they become available.
Thank you. Obviously, that's a long ways off. It's important. I mean, I'm not saying it should be done faster. You can't. But that's a long ways off. I'd like to see, as one board member, I'd like to see staff back giving us an update within, maybe by the fall.
We might could do that in the executive officer's report, Carl.
That would be a good place to put it, Bob. Thank you. If we could have updates there, and then we could ask questions each board meeting as we come up with them. But I'm just wondering about this whole thing on enforcement. I don't feel good about going out there and whacking the counties and the city and so forth when we don't have a plan. And I think that before we should consider that, unless it was really egregious, is it would take something like a TMDL up front, I think, for trash to be able to develop a plan, working with the partners, and then that plan is enforceable. And that might be another way to go. So I'll take input definitely from the executive officer.
Carl?
Yes.
Did you want that right now, or can we have more discussion?
Well, we can have more discussion, but I'd like to hear them on the TMDL. Maybe it's not a good idea, and I'd like to hear if it's not.
Well, I would say that, first of all, there is a statewide trash policy. But I think that goes, when you look at the statewide trash policy and you look at the legal authorities that the counties have and the municipalities and the MS4s have, it's a little different when you're talking about homeless encampments, particularly homeless encampments in a floodplain. There's a mix of, whereas the trash policy does say to most MS4 systems, you have to account for trash and figure out what your solution for trash within your system is going to be. The situation becomes a little different when you're talking about the floodplain area, which isn't per se part of the MS4 system. So it's a mixture of county land use, it's a mixture of other parks departments and things like that when it comes to dealing with these homeless encampments. I will say I looked a little bit into what Region 2 did, because Region 2 confronted this issue a number of years ago. They're still working through this issue. They took some initial enforcement posture, and what it really wound up doing was teeing off a more collaborative issue involving a lot of the stakeholders. And I think that's pretty much the same that we have here. It is something that we can rely on if the county land use authorities and other folks that manage these areas are not stepping up and doing what they're supposed to be doing. If they're falling below a certain standard of care, I think we would have opportunity to take enforcement against them. I think that what we've seen, particularly in the past few years, is that the Sacramento County, the city of Sacramento, a number of the parks agencies have really made this a central part of their efforts. They get the citizen complaints, and they're trying to be responsive. You saw Mr. Leatherman's charts about how they're increasing the level of expenditure, the level of staffing to deal with these issues, even in budget-constrained times. So I think that, you know, if we saw those charts going the other direction, the board could certainly entertain enforcement options. And I think it's a little different than certain spills where we see counties and municipalities falling below the standard of care and not doing what they're supposed to be doing. I think right now the assessment of our water quality folks is that the counties are taking this with a level of seriousness that the matter requires. And so the next step is to work with them to find more collaborative solutions, to continue doing our piece of the puzzle, doing the monitoring, doing the water quality analysis, and continuing to participate with the regional efforts to deal with this problem, which I think everybody recognizes it's totally and utterly related to the economic conditions that many individuals face in finding housing in this state, where housing is more expensive than any other place in the country.
What Patrick
Yes, Bob.
said.
Go ahead.
No, what Patrick said. But basically, you know, we're not the first people into this particular realm here, and other people have been working on it, and our staff has entered this arena now, and I think is doing an excellent job. But I think, like, the work from the parks and the funding they're putting in, and the city and counties of Sacramento have really given us a jump start. And a lot of times when we take enforcement, it's to get that jump start, and we have that going here. I think being in a collaborative effort promises the most short-term and perhaps long-term results, and we do have that big stick if we need it, and certainly a lot of the participants know the big stick we have. I wanted to thank the term human tragedy and comparing that to the Depression and what's going on now. That's pretty hard to hear, but it's really true, I think. And we do have a source of funding for this. Our Clean and Abatement Fund, I think, is very appropriate, and we should be thinking about that as a possible money source to throw into this collaborative effort. For me, always and now, is the prioritization of that funding for drinking water in those communities that don't have it is still my #1 priority, but this is a close one behind that, I think. And we should be thinking, or maybe our staff, as they're putting together their plan, might be thinking of some funding and how it might best be used to help this problem. Thanks.
Any other input? Yes. Go ahead, Denise.
Yeah, I just think that as we move in the direction of trying to do a collaborative, just as we've done in dealing with ag and irrigated lands, the homeless are considered a problem as it relates to this particular issue in water quality, but they can also be considered a part of the solution. I think the collaborative effort moving forward, trying to engage them, you can, you know, I'm for enforcement as well, of course I am, but I also want to make sure that we give the population that's creating a part of this problem an opportunity to be a part of the solution. So how that comes about being, I think it's important to have them at the table or represented. And, you know, I heard earlier about the opportunity for jobs. I mean, it has to be somewhere, and this is beyond our efforts here, but since our staff is going to be working to try to get this collaborative going, it's worth considering how they can be engaged and help be a part of this process, so we can stop some portions of it from continuing to happen and begin to clean up some of the areas. So I'm really looking for you, as Dr. Longley said, to think outside of the box, look for short-term and long-term solutions. And prior to this time, I don't know that we've engaged the population, the homeless population, enough in this whole process. No one wants to live in the conditions in which they're living. I heard Carmen say that, you know, some of it's mental health, some of it's choice, but the bottom line is economics and the lack of affordable housing. So engaging them in this process and laying out a strategic plan of how you go about doing it in short term and long term, I think it would take us a long way. And I do appreciate this discussion throughout the day. And it is a human tragedy, but you don't throw the baby away with the bathwater. You look at how we can try to fix this. And I was not here when the board tackled irrigated lands and the coalitions, but we've come a long way with that, and I think we can do the same thing with this as we keep our eyes open and work towards a solution together. Thank you.
You know,
Go ahead, Raji.
You know, in Kern County in Bakersfield, the homeless center actually there, to what Denise was saying, what they do is they have a work program for people who are at the center, and they go and they clean up the side of the freeways and different contracts with the county, and they get paid, and it's it's a way for them to earn income and have a job. But it's a really great program, and that's what they do. The buses come in the morning, they pick up the workers, the people who live at the center, and they go clean all day long, and they get paid at the end of the day. And it's a contract with the county of Kern. So that might be something to look into, maybe give them a call and see how it works, instead of recreating, the wheel, as Dr. Longley said earlier. It's a really great program.
That is the reason why we need the collaboration, because we're not really in the capacity to do that, but we can work with others who can help us work with them to find some solutions, because just telling them to get out of the park, one, it's not illegal for them to be in the park, and it's not illegal for them to be homeless. And so we have to be conscious of that it's not so simple as telling them get out, and I wouldn't do that anyway if that's where their shelter is. And I also have to worry about whatever children are associated with this too. That's probably as a mother and grandmother, that's my biggest concern right now.
And what they do is the children stay at the center, and there's like a program that watches the children while their moms and dads go off to work. It's a really neat program.
Go ahead, John.
Thanks. I appreciate where Patrick was coming from, that even though we have the hammer, that's sort of gets you to the place where you can have a collaborative process. And if we're already there, I think you hold the enforcement sort of in the back of everybody's mind. I certainly don't want to lead with it, especially if it's going to rock the boat away from the good work that's already been done. I was struck by some of the pictures that reminded me of the cannabis pictures we used to see up in the hills, and even the Rubicon discussion. And the Rubicon started before I got here, but one of my first presentations was the big success that it was. And this is slightly different because of the root cause isn't people with money that are recreating. It's people without money. And so and socially, I can't figure out whether the recession or good times causes this bigger problem, because when the houses was cheap and we had the highest affordability rate, you still had a massive recession, and that forced a lot of folks into this situation. And now that there's more jobs and the unemployment is as low as it's been in a while, housing has shot up. So it's certainly a problem that I'm happy we're looking into. I like the collaborative approach. I like keeping the enforcement in the back. And hopefully, whenever there's a new board member, they'll hear the presentation of how this was a success. But we need to study it. We need to do the work. We need to keep moving forward. So I'm appreciative of this effort today.
I would like to learn a little bit more, quite a bit more maybe, about both Region 9 and Region 2's efforts, and I think there's probably a lot for us to learn about lessons that both of you may already know because of your contact and work with them, but I think the board members it might help us as we wrestle with this issue also. So, and that might be a topic at the next WQCC. I think we need to check on that. For a Water Quality Coordinating Committee, which is a meeting of all regional board members that occurs in October every year. So, very good. Any further input on this? Roland, do you want to come up to the podium?
Thank you very much. This is very brief. Despite the well-founded discussion of the roots of homelessness as being caused by the economics, there's nothing inherent that says if you're camping on the river, you have to throw your trash into the river or into the creek. Every household in Sacramento, regardless of their financial status, throws their trash into a bin. And I think a really good place to start is to try to get the people who live in these camps to throw their trash into bags. And that would solve a lot of this, regardless of their mental state. If they can haul stuff to their camp, they can usually throw it into a bag and haul it back out again. And that's what I've been working on personally. So, with more support and more bags and more people throwing and more people picking it up. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. If there's no further discussion on this, yes. Mr. Templin.
Just one last point that wasn't dealt with. Human health, when Randy and I were there last week, there was tape set off from a body that had been found there. And just the week before, I posted on Facebook, man, I hope they get these people out of here before the water comes up, because drowning could be a good possibility. Back when I was with USGS, Water Quality Monitoring in Southern California, the new and there was two different canals that came in from Mexico. They quit water quality sampling for sediment when the largest sediment type was a human body. I'm sure they found a human body right next to the river, maybe in the water last week. I'm not sure how much of that is happening, but I'm sure the law enforcement has those statistics. And, it's a big concern. I mean, those people are down there, they're dying from overdose, they're dying from murders, there's shootings going on, as well as drowning. So
Thank you.
just want to bring that up.
Yeah, thank you very much. We'll wrap this up, but something did come to mind when you're talking about that. Disturbance of the banks in this area also contributes to sediment transport into the river, which is something else we have to consider. Thank you very much. We will wrap this up. We will take a short break. What time is it now? Be back here by 3:30.
Dr. Longley?
Yes.
Can I just take 2 minutes of the board time, because we won't have it, and she's sitting right here. But tomorrow is Nicole Morgan's last day with our board. She's going to state board.
You're a traitor. You're leaving us.
Nicole has a young child, and she lives on the other side, closer to state board, and so for her life and quality of life, it's much easier for her.
I don't want to
excuses
lose
for
her. Dr. Longley, you were on my side this morning. No trading sides.
I didn't know you were leaving us.
I don't want to lose her, but I understand her circumstance, so I'm glad for her. She's
Very
been
good.
able to get what she
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go back to agenda item 6 for a couple of awards, and then we'll move on to, I believe, agenda item 9 and then 11.
E. coli will be resolved during the summer because
There we go. We're back in session. Going back to item 6, we have 2 awards to hand out, pass out, to give.
Sure, you want to come hand them out, Bruce? Yeah, okay. So, okay, board, we have awards for Patrick Morris and Selena Cole, who are in our planning group here in the Sacramento office. Patrick is a senior water resources control engineer, and Selena Cole is a scientist, an environmental scientist, and they're on the project team for the Delta Regional Monitoring Program in our Sacramento office. They have consistently provided exemplar, I can't say the word now, that word, leadership and technical expertise in guiding the Delta Regional Monitoring Program's monitoring design, sampling plans, and quality assurance plans. In addition to the highly technical nature of monitoring in the Delta, Patrick and Selena have led stakeholder discussions and provided guidance to the program's lead entity, the Aquatic Science Center, throughout the development and implementation of the program. Since Patrick and Selena began working on the Delta Regional Monitoring Program, there have been major strides forward. These include moving from an unfunded program to a $1 million per year sustainably funded monitoring program with 4 constituent focus areas and a stakeholder-led steering committee. Patrick and Selena's tireless work has ensured the future of the Delta Regional Monitoring Program, which will provide scientific studies and information to guide the regional water board management in water quality policies for the Delta. I guess that's the way it's supposed to read. Patrick and Selena are fun to work with, highly motivated and skilled staff members, and are very deserving of this award. So thank you.
It sounds like a morning show, the Patrick and Selena show.
We'll now move to agenda item 9, which is this time the board will hear the annual enforcement update for the Central Valley region. This is an information item only and no action will be taken, although the board may ask questions and provide direction to staff. Other interested persons will then be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. We'll now hear the staff presentation.
Good afternoon, Dr. Longley and members of the board. My name is Robert LaRue, and I am a Senior Water Resource Control Engineer and the Enforcement Coordinator for the Central Valley region. Today I'll be providing you an update on our enforcement program at the Central Valley Regional Board. This is an information item only and requires no vote. As part of this presentation, I'm going to provide you a brief update on the compliance enforcement program, including some statistics on staff efforts, some context from changes in the new enforcement policy, a brief update on supplemental environmental projects or SEPs, and the new SEP policy, and a mention of the proposed 2018-19 fiscal year priorities for the program. There will also be time for questions. The Central Valley Regional Board began a new management initiative that we refer to as portfolio management with the 2014-15 fiscal year. Each year, as part of this initiative, each of the 18 program managers develop a work plan that details the existing resources and future goals for the program. For the current fiscal year, the Compliance and Enforcement Program, of which I am the program manager, identifies 142 staff representing approximately 57 person years, or PY, conducting at least some degree of compliance and enforcement. By comparison, I was recently told that in one of the smaller regions, they have only one PY allocated to enforcement. Another component of this initiative is an annual face-to-face meeting where we lay out the goals of the work plan and staff working in enforcement can meet face-to-face and share ideas. That meeting was held here for staff, here in the boardroom for staff from all 3 offices last July. The priorities in the work plan for the current fiscal year are to focus more on compliance assistance and outreach rather than issuing enforcement actions, to comprehensively track all the water quality complaints that come into the region, and to utilize compressed administrative civil liabilities, or ACLs, where appropriate, in multiple programs as they had been utilized primarily in the construction stormwater program in the 16-17 fiscal year. With respect to compliance assistance and outreach, staff in the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program have been conducting regular stakeholder meetings in an effort to avoid future enforcement actions as you have seen here today. Additionally, compliance and enforcement staff attend County Environmental Crime Task Force meetings, during which staff are able to notify the local environmental agencies what resources we can provide to avoid discharges that may result in enforcement. Finally, another effort was a staff presentation conducted at the January 10th California Water Environment Association to prepare the regulated community for potential changes to sanitary sewer waste discharge requirements. That presentation was specifically intended to notify the regulated community that we would prefer to collaborate if they're having issues rather than finding out on our own and having to initiate an enforcement action. With respect to complaints, in March of 2016, the California EPA released a new version of their complaint database that all of the boards, departments, and agencies, or BDOs, including the water boards, utilize for tracking complaints that come into our respective websites. Board staff have been collaborating with Cal EPA staff in refining their database so that it meets our needs and vice versa, and we will continue to do so. The Central Valley Regional Board followed suit and in December of that year updated our own tracking mechanisms such that we can comprehensively track all the complaints that come into the region, whether by online, email, or phone. Based on these changes, we've observed an increase from about 13 complaints tracked per month to over 18 over the course of the last 2 years. In total, of the 392 complaints received and tracked to date, using the system, 342, or about 87%, have been addressed and closed, with investigations ongoing for the remaining 50. I should say, of those closed complaints, not all of them were staff actions, but many are referred to external agencies like county environmental health agencies to address. The final priority for the 17-18 fiscal year was to roll out our compressed ACLs to programs other than in stormwater. The origin for the compressed ACLs evolved from an overwhelming number of violations observed in the stormwater program during the 16-17 rainy season, primarily due to the heavy rain sustained. The situation was exacerbated by the perceived disregard by the industries, contractors, and developers. Staff attempted to develop a method for expediting ACLs in these cases, which eventually became the compressed ACLs. They are essentially a boiled down version of an ACL issued in an effort to allow staff time for other cases. Staff have issued one compressed ACL, as you heard today, in the current fiscal year and will continue to look for opportunities to efficiently issue enforcement actions. Additionally, I gave a presentation on this topic to the other enforcement coordinators at one of our regular roundtable meetings, so the effort may be utilized in other regions as well. The next section of my presentation is intended to provide a summary of some of the data that we've accumulated over the last calendar year. I'll be providing you with numbers on inspections, violations, and enforcement actions. With regard to inspections, this chart shows the number of inspections conducted by regional board staff in each of the last 10 years. As you can see, regional board staff have conducted over 1,500 inspections in each of those years. And there have been several years where over 2,000 inspections were conducted. Although there has been a slight decreasing trend over the last few years, attributable partially to lost contractor and staff resources, individual program inspection targets have generally been achieved during this period.
I'd like to go into that with you just a moment. As I recall, there was a contract loss last year, is that correct?
I believe that is correct, yes.
And just a little background on that, a minute or two, if you don't mind. What percent of the workload were they handling?
I'm not sure if I know the
I
percentage.
don't think I can tell you the numbers, Dr. Longley. It was a redirection of the contract with PG Environmental through US EPA, where they redirected the resources from inspections to just permitting and pretreatment support. So we lost that number of inspections. I'm suspect of some of these numbers. On the show, I know we saw a loss. We're seeing a pretty big loss, so I want to verify that these are accurate. It may be a data collection error here.
Yeah, because really, it's about over a 30% decrease.
Yeah, it's a significant number drop, and we've increased our oil fields and our cannabis.
Exactly.
So I'm a little shocked by this drop, especially since our numbers and our work plan numbers have been met, so we haven't been decreasing the number of inspections. So I need to get this clarified.
And this could be shown to us in, as Bob suggested, a previous item in
The
executive
report.
officer's report, but
Yeah.
I would certainly like to see that, because I'm concerned, and close enough to the oil program to know everything that's going on there. Clint tells me what he's doing up in his program. I would agree with you. These look real
Yeah,
suspect.
it's a little suspect. Mhm.
And you'll see one of the priorities next year is to ensure that we have the business rules necessary to continue to track inspections and enforcement actions appropriately.
Okay.
We've already begun some of that with the administrative group assisting me in ensuring we have such business rules.
Quick, it could be also, we said our staff, for a while, we realized we hadn't inspected all of our dairies, so they did an extra effort to do more dairy inspections. We hadn't been to any of the oil fields, so we did a special targeted inspection. So you may see also a bump just because we did that extra work in
But
those
there's
years.
about 600, 700 difference, so
Yeah.
that doesn't account for it.
All of that, no.
No. Okay, thank you.
The next chart shows the number of inspections for each regional board over the last calendar year. With respect to each regional board over the last calendar year. While the number of inspections this year is somewhat down from previous years, Central Valley Regional Board staff still conducted the most number of inspections amongst the 9 regional boards.
But that number looked a lot different if you did it on number of inspections per POA. But 4 is up simply because I know of their stormwater program.
Yeah, typically you will see regions 4 and 5 having the most number of actions
Yes,
in general. This chart shows the number of violations per region over the last 5 years. As can be seen, the number of violations recorded by staff has been steadily decreasing over the last 5 years. Again, this is consistent with the Los Angeles region, although to a more dramatic effect. While not anything to brag about, the Central Valley Regional Board has recorded the most violations amongst the 9 regional boards again. The slide shows the number of enforcement actions for each of these activities that the board staff have undertaken in 2017. As you saw during an earlier presentation today, the amount of resources required for each action increases, as does the severity as you go up the chart. For the most part, the numbers decrease as one goes up the scale. As you can see, staff issued over 500 informal enforcement actions letters and notices of violation last year, as well as over 600 notices of stormwater noncompliance, which includes both first and second notice of stormwater noncompliance. The one exception is the number of ACLs. As can be seen, there are 56 ACLs issued in 2017, but almost half of those were for mandatory minimum penalty assessments for NPDES wastewater violations. For mandatory minimum penalties, or MMPs, the regional board must assess an ACL for the mandatory amount of $3,000 per violation, or a greater amount. In essence, there is no discretion on the part of board staff whether to issue these ACLs or not. Staff are continuing to utilize progressive enforcement in concert with the state board enforcement policy. The next part of this presentation will deal with the updated 2017 enforcement policy. The previous enforcement policy was adopted by the State Board in 2009 and made effective in May of 2010. The revisions to the enforcement policy stem from issues that staff working on enforcement actions have experienced in those 7+ years and include clarifying procedural and substantive changes. This presentation will specifically focus on the substantive changes that affect the ACL penalty calculation methodology. The ACL penalty methodology establishes a method for the water boards to consider statutory factors when determining an appropriate civil liability in a fair, transparent, and consistent manner. In essence, it's a fairly detailed and thorough rubric by which staff can arrive at a number when determining an ACL. The considerations for ACLs are framed in Water Code sections 13.327 and 13.385. This chart shows a graphical representation of the process for staff to calculate an ACL penalty from the 2010 enforcement policy. So the numbers in some of these boxes have changed, but it illustrates the considerations on the part of the staff, including the nature, circumstance, extent, and gravity of the violation, whether the discharge is susceptible to cleanup or abatement, the degree of toxicity, and with respect to the violator, the ability to pay, the effect and inability to continue in business, any voluntary cleanup efforts undertaken, any prior history of violations, the degree of culpability, economic benefit, or other matters as justice may require. For discharge violations, the first step in determining the penalty is the potential for harm. Toxicity, or the characteristics of the discharge, is essentially the material being discharged. How toxic is that material? This factor ranges from 0 to 4. In the 2010 policy, toxicity, or the characteristics, was calculated after the potential for harm, which seemed to imply that toxicity should have some dilution factor applied. Thus, the 2017 policy attempts to make clear that toxicity is determined on the characteristics of the material alone before it is discharged. The next step in determining the actual harm or potential for harm.
So what you say there, excuse me for interrupting factor one, it says characteristics of discharge, but that's really the characteristics of the material itself. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
And some of that what came to light during that irrigated lands discussion earlier today with respect to pesticides or turbid material, essentially.
Right. So this is not correct for the current, for the new policy then?
It's just the order in which it comes into the document in an effort to kind of make it clear to our regulated community, essentially. Excuse me. The next step in determining the actual harm is to determine, or excuse me, the next step in determining actual harm or potential for harm to beneficial uses is determining harm to beneficial uses, excuse me. The numbers in this factor range from 0 to 5. The 2017 policy clarifies that the potential for harm can still be calculated if actual harm cannot be quantified due to untimely reports, inadequate monitoring, and or other practical limitations. The third component in determining the overall harm is determining if the discharge is susceptible to cleanup. The 2017 policy switches the focus from susceptibility to the discharger's actions. A score of 0 is assigned for this factor if the discharger cleans up 50% or more of the discharge within a reasonable amount of time. A score of 1 is assigned for this factor if less than 50% of the discharge is susceptible to cleanup or abatement, or if 50% or more of the, but the discharger failed to clean up 50% or more of the discharge within a reasonable time. Thus, this change effectively removes the susceptibility and puts the focus on the response of the discharger. The numbers from the first three factors are then combined to determine what the overall potential for harm factor will be based on tables 1 and 2 in the policy. The 2017 policy modifies this factor to some degree in an effort to smooth out the curve, and you'll see that in the next couple of slides. Depending on what the deviation from requirement is, minor, moderate, or major, the factor can range from 0.005 to 1 or no reduction. This chart shows the jumps in the adjustment factors based on the various potential for harm numbers. You have potential for harm on the x-axis and adjustment factors on the y-axis, and the three deviations from requirement, major, moderate, and minor. As you can see, there is very little difference between the factors until the harm reaches 4, then noticeable jumps between 4 to 5 and 7 to 8. This was often a point of contention in calculations and in settlement negotiations when factors fell within those ranges. This figure charts the revised factors overlaid with the previous factors. The solid lines represent the new factors from the 2017 policy. As you can see, the dramatic increases between factors have been mitigated, which will hopefully lead to more focused discussions in future negotiations and calculations. For per day non-discharge violations, a change is instituted in the new policy for the degree to which staff may collapse days of violations for multiple violations exceeding 30 days, or essentially reduce the number of days by which the penalty is calculated. The new policy prescribes that days 30 through 60 of a violation may be collapsed by a ratio of 5 to 1 rather than 30 to 1. This would result in an additional 5 days of violation from the previous policy. The Water Board still maintained the discretion to decline to collapse days or to collapse at any level deemed appropriate between the maximum suggested collapse number and the actual number of days of violation. For high volume discharges, the 2010 policy allowed for reductions from $10 per gallon to $2 per gallon, but provided limited guidance on when to apply that reduction. The 2017 policy removes limitations for sewage and stormwater discharges and allows the reduction to apply for any high volume discharge. The 2017 policy also prescribes high volume to be between 100,000 gallons and 2 million gallons. For discharges in excess of 2 million gallons or for discharges of recycled water, a per gallon penalty of $1 per gallon may be used. The 2017 policy also eliminates the presumption of $2 per gallon max liability for high volume discharges and allows regional boards to select max liability between $2 and $10 per gallon. For step 4 in calculating an AC penalty is applying the adjustment factors: culpability, history of violations, and cleanup and cooperation. For culpability, to what degree the violations intentional or negligent. The 2017 policy raises the minimum multiplier from 0.5 to 0.75 and clarifies the rationale for applying a multiplier of less than 1, such that the discharger must show it has exceeded the standard of care expected of a reasonably prudent person to prevent the violation. The 2017 policy changes the history of violations such that there is no reduction for having a history with no violations. The minimum will always be 1. The 2017 policy further prescribes that where the discharger has prior violations within the last 5 years, the Water Board should use a multiplier of 1.1. Where the discharger has a history of similar or numerous dissimilar violations, the Water Board should consider adopting a multiplier above 1.1. For cleanup and cooperation, the 2010 policy uses factors ranging from 0.75 to 1.5. The 2017 policy includes clarifying language such that the multiplier between 0.75 to 1 for exceptional cleanup and cooperation compared to what can be reasonably expected. A neutral multiplier of 1 for a reasonable and prudent response to a discharge violation or timely response to a water board order. And a multiplier above 1 when a discharger's response to a violation falls below the normally expected response. The final checks and considerations include the ability to pay, economic benefit, and other factors as justice may require. The 2017 policy clarifies that ability to pay is determined by considering income and net worth. It also clarifies that the water boards can issue subpoenas to obtain ability to pay information, and that failure to comply or provide full and accurate information should be treated as discharger waiving its right to challenge a finding of ability to pay. Finally, clarifications that the ability to pay is just a consideration and no obligation to ensure that a discharger can pay and or stay in business is required. With respect to the economic benefit gained from the violations, the 2017 policy clarifies that the economic benefit is the absolute minimum penalty for Section 13385 violations. For other water code violations, penalty amounts can only go below if imposing economic benefit would be unjust or against public policy. The board must also consider other factors as justice may require, and may include staff costs in the final liability, in which case staff costs should be based on each staff person's hourly rate, including benefits and overhead, and those costs should include those incurred between the time a violation is discovered or when the first informal enforcement action is issued and the time of the ACL complaint is issued.
Isn't this a change in the recent policy?
Yes, this is a
Because
change.
we were told we could not include staff costs previously.
Yeah, we can include staff costs.
But we have to track those staff costs.
That's correct. That is correct.
And it has to be recorded how much time was spent specifically and so forth. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
and I would also add that the staff costs don't actually go back to pay staff costs. They go into the cleanup and abatement account or the waste discharge permit fund. So it's not a direct relationship there.
And yeah, and we are implementing some tracking mechanism for violations that have occurred after the adoption date of October 5th of last year to account for this change. Attorney costs and costs associated with preparing for and attending a hearing are not to be included in these calculations. I think I skipped one. Thank you. As far as applying, I just mentioned this, as far as applying the revised policy, the effective date of the policy is October 5th, 2017. Staff have implemented the clarifying and procedural changes, but are still using the 2010 penalty methodology for violations that occurred prior to this date, such as the case you saw this morning. However, staff are beginning to implement the revised methodology for violations occurring after that date as well. In addition to the enforcement policy, a new SEP policy was also adopted by State Board in 2017. I have listed a few of the considerations that will affect how the new policy will impact how staff addresses SEPs. Oversight costs for third parties can now be included in settlements. This has been an issue in the past as dischargers were reluctant to pay an additional oversight cost beyond the settlement amount. The new policy also allows for greater than 50% of the settlement for SEPs where they benefit environmental justice or the human right to water. For third-party SEPs, the new policy requires that third parties provide twice annual reports on how SEP funds were expended to ensure AB 1071 compliance, and requires annual reporting from the regional boards to the Office of Enforcement on all SEPs. However, it does not allow the regional boards to interpret completion of the project to equal payment to the third parties for third-party SEPs. Regional board staff reached 5 settlement agreements that included SEPs in 2017, totaling $731,979. The Central Valley Regional Board currently has 2 initiatives intended to specifically fund SEPs, one for disadvantaged communities with our third-party partners, the Rose Foundation, and one for the Delta Regional Monitoring Program. Through 2017, the Rose Foundation reports 5 projects fully complete and another 9 at some degree of completion. The total amount dispersed to the Rose Foundation exceeds $1 million, but the Regional Board has not yet reached an agreement, including a SEP for the Delta Regional Monitoring Program.
So if I can stop there, we had serious concerns with the proposed changes to the SEP language regarding the third party. Chris Kerrigan and the State Board were unwilling to add language that would allow a release of liability if they paid into at least the Rose Foundation or something similar where we had a very structured agreement with a third party. They refused to add that language. What we had been doing in our settlements before was adding in some language that sort of worked around it, that provided some assurances that they're in agreement with the Office of Enforcement, this alternate language that didn't give them explicit release of liability, but enough intention of that they agreed to it. We can't use that language anymore. It'd be in violation of the current policy. We had been led to believe when they revised the SEP, they would add those conditions in for this. We don't use that anymore. We won't be using that language in any settlements anymore. So there is a risk that a discharger, it may be at a cost to the Rose Foundation as a result. So that was a big issue with us. I fought hard with the State Board staff and the State Board members on our briefings on it for us, but in the end, we didn't succeed.
What was the reasoning?
They believe that it's just their direction they chose to go. They didn't have a good particular reason for it, other than the discharger needed to be kept on the hook until the project was complete.
And I think there was a concern raised by Mr. Kerrigan and others at the State Board that the the liability shouldn't be moved from the discharger to the state, which is maybe sort of what would happen there. And that was one of their major arguments against this, was that they felt that in doing that and releasing that liability, that then the state was taking some of that on. And so
I agree with him for many of them, but for these third-party structures where we had such an agreement in place and an accountability and a reporting mechanism in place, I was just looking for a sliver of an exception in there for those types of conditions, but we weren't able to succeed. The board was just not going to allow it.
That's right, and that's probably something.
Pamela, I think we should maybe push to put that topic on the WQCC meeting next October and see what all the other boards, when we're all in the same room, think about that.
Sure.
Yeah, and if I could, on this topic, I mean, my experience with numerous settlements and negotiating and trying to get funding for the Rose Foundation is that release of liability and being able to do that upon payment to the Rose Foundation. That was really a key in getting those, and otherwise dischargers were significantly less interested. And in my opinion, this will mean we really won't be funding much with the Rose Foundation, unfortunately.
Well, it's not something we can write off, so we have to keep working on it. It has to be on our hit list, priority list.
This was a discussion topic at our enforcement roundtable as well with the other enforcement coordinators throughout the state, and there's support amongst those regions as well for
The
similar.
regional boards were all in support of adding that language.
That's
It
good.
was
So we-
just the State Board.
We need to keep talking about it.
They kept citing our program as being so successful, but we kept pointing out to them that they were allowing us to put that clause in it that sort of was a workaround. So it didn't work. So
Running out of time, so let's go on.
Yeah. Finally, as our executive officer provided you with the proposed priorities for each of the programs for the next fiscal year, the 2 priorities proposed for the enforcement program are ensuring compliance with pending changes in the CV SALTS program, which will require substantial collaboration with staff in that initiative to ensure that the changes can be adequately complied with and enforced, and verifying that we have appropriate and accurate business rules for data entry for our enforcement actions, particularly with respect to the 2017 enforcement policy changes.
Thank you. Questions?
This concludes my presentation. I'm happy to address any questions. Thank you.
Questions? Well, I think that the Rose Foundation issue is surfaced, I call it Rose Foundation issue, the ability to transfer liability to a third party such as the Rose Foundation is high on our list.
Yeah, I would just say that if there is such a precipitous drop, that we keep that data pretty handy.
Yep. Any further comments?
Thanks, Robert. Appreciate the update.
Great,
Thank you so much.
Great presentation. Thank you very much. With that,
No, she's saying we need to take one more picture.
why do you need one more picture?
It came out from. Oh, Patrick and Selena are back. Yeah, the Patrick and Selena show. Just one quick second.
If that one didn't come out, then I think you have enough that you can Photoshop it. Thank you very much. That takes us to the end of the day and agenda item 11, election of the chair and vice chair. At this time, we move to the election of the chair and vice chair for the Region 5 Water Board. And I have one card here, an individual wishing to address the board. Stephen Green. I saw him step out, so we will proceed. Mr. Green comes back, we'll give him a chance to address the board. I open the floor to discussion and nominations.
Carl, there are a couple things happening this year. One is the CV SALTs, and the other is hiring and bringing up to speed a new executive director. And for those 2 reasons, unless, I'm willing to entertain other options, but my inclination is to keep the same leadership for chair and vice chair as we have this year into next year.
Carmen?
So I'm not proposing a change to that, but I think that every year I like to at least find out or gauge the interest of other board members. I'm certainly very happy with the leadership as we have it now, but I'd like to just sort of gauge interest by any other people, and if anyone is so interested. Okay, never mind. So I would ask, Dr. Longley and as chair, and then Ms. Cadera as vice chair, whether or not they would be willing to accept a nomination.
Only if Denise accepts.
I'd be willing to accept. I've not spoken about it to this extent, but I've been under great leadership from Dr. Longley, and I would willingly serve in the capacity that I have for the last couple of years.
Okay, well,
And let me just say that I would appreciate the opportunity to see CV SALTs through to the end, so to speak, which is hopefully June 1st. But there's a lot of other things going on, folks. You're going to have the produced water issues back in front of you, and these are something I've been highly involved in, and we will see.
okay, so with that, I'd like to make a motion that we make Dr. Longley chair and Ms. Cadera vice chair. So that's my motion.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Call the roll.
Ms. Ramirez?
Yes.
Ms. Brar?
Yes.
Mr. Costantino?
Aye.
Mr. Schneider? Ms. Kadara?
Aye.
Dr. Longley?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Adjourn.